Hello. Welcome to our migration and containerization webinar. We have Nigel Stokes, the VirtaMove CEO, and Scott Slater, our Customer Success Manager, presenting. If you have any questions, please submit them on the side panel, and we'll answer them at the end during the question and answer period. And we hope you enjoy. Over to you, Nigel.
Hey, thanks, Candace, and welcome, everyone. We really appreciate the time and your interest in our migration and containerization story today. We're going to cover a few things, a basic introduction of who VirtaMove is, what our mission is, an outline of migration intelligence and the suite of products that we offer in that area. We're going to talk a bit about the 5 stages of the migrations journey that we see in working with customers around the world and the issues they have to deal with. We'll do a demo, a simple demo. Scott will help with that, outlining the movement of a web application onto a modern server, and then the containerization of that application in a Windows Docker container. This is an area of interest. We'll talk a little bit about some of the issues that may show up in that process, and then answer any questions that listeners may have regarding the demo and our approach. Okay? So, the mission, VirtaMove's mission, is to statefully move the world's applications, Windows Server applications, to make organizations more successful and secure. We're dealing with older technology that's been around for anywhere from 5 to 15 years. We're seeing customers move not only Windows 2000, 2003, and 2008, which comes to end of service on January 20th of 2020 or January 15th of 2020, but also customers are looking at moving forward from Windows Server 2012 now to 2016 or 2019. Together, we really work to make your production apps and move them to a better place. That's what our core goal is. We measure success on a simple metric in the business. We count the number of successful completed moves that we do as a company to modern, secure, supported Windows Server operating systems. We measure that every day. We measure it every quarter. And that's what our customers really want us to do, is get them to new platforms, get their applications running on better servers, more modern servers. So we do that with a suite of products. We call it a migration intelligence suite. So it's a series of products. The first one is called vMaestro. It's an orchestration product that manages a variety of agents that are installed either on production apps or on target environments, so on the target servers. Maestro runs on its own dedicated server. It's behind your firewall, so it's fully secured. You don't need to have external flow of any of this information. The agents that are installed on production are there really to secure the data flow, so it encrypts the data flow and compresses it between the source production environment and the target environment. It's a copy out process. It doesn't change your production environment. That's very important to us. We discover the full state of your current production applications. Again, that's important because many customers don't have install scripts. They may not have source code. And they may have inherited these applications from other team members that they've worked with over time, and they're dependent on them. They're important applications. They run their business. they can't afford to have those production applications impacted. So Maestro provides the full orchestration layer. It manages the vMonitor agents, which are installed, and those agents really build templates for the production applications. We can learn and come up a learning curve based on actual use of the applications by a customer. So we don't need that source code or install script. We learn it, learn the application based on actual use on your Windows Server environment. Once we've fully come up the learning curve and vMonitor has learned the full application, it will green light it, and that application then template can be loaded into our migrate technology. vMigrate, again, an agent that's installed on the destination server. It receives the flow that comes from the source system. It copies that data and that application into a sandbox area on the target or destination server. That sandbox allows you, it's a container that we have, a proprietary container on the destination, and you can then test the application, ensure it works properly, consistent with how it did on the production server. You can take that application and take a copy of it, compress it for further use, perhaps on a test or dev environment, or if you'd like to test it out on a cloud server or other applications like that. But vMigrate allows you to thoroughly test in a controlled environment, a container on your destination modern server, the full functionality of your production apps. Once you're happy, there's no dependency on the container itself. We can then dissolve the container, and it reinstalls the application where it should be, depending on which destination environment you're going to. So it installs slightly differently on Windows Server 2012 versus 2016 versus 2019. The other step, which we'll demo today, is you can also install that application from our container into a Windows Docker container. Now, for most customers, that's more of an experimental process. We fully understand that Windows Docker, for the most part, is best focused on new development or redevelopment because you want to build a proper containerization strategy. You might have a microservices architecture, and the legacy environments we're moving may not lend themselves to that type of redevelopment easily. But we believe that getting your legacy apps to a modern server is always the best first step and will get you to a better place where you can do enhancement, remediation, or redevelopment of that application. The fourth area is we can, of course, move to any OS instance. It can be a cloud instance running under a hypervisor. So it could be AWS or Google Cloud Platform or Azure as a target. As long as you have an OS instance, you can copy it to all of those environments. There are still issues that customers need to deal with, obviously security, Active Directory, and a variety of those issues come into play when you're copying your applications out to public cloud environments. We have approaches that deal with that, but it's certainly an issue for customers as they move forward to move older apps to public clouds. So that's an overview, if you like, of our Migration Intelligence Suite. Now we'd like to move on and talk about the 5 stages of the migration journey that we see in customer environments. The first stage is where the production application is running on an existing server environment, a legacy server. We'll say today Windows Server 2003 or 2008 as an example. What we're trying to do at that stage, and we see customers doing a variety of things to try and upgrade those servers. The first thing that we see some customers doing is in-place upgrades, where they try installing a new operating system, a new version, over top of those applications on their existing production servers. So that's obviously a fairly risky move, and certainly our customers say it's sometimes doesn't end well because they may get into an unstable state when they try and do that. It's extremely important to back up your environment if you're going to try and do an in-place upgrade of an operating system on older hardware. The other thing that we hear from customers, they'll just reinstall all of the applications they're currently running on a new server, a modern server. That has a different set of impacts. As you can understand, there's an issue around getting install scripts. Do those install scripts work on the modern server? Probably not. Do you want to move to a modern version of the app that's supported on a modern OS? That can be expensive and somewhat risky, and you typically have to retrain staff and the team to use the next version. So those are issues that customers deal with. What they typically want us to do is take what they have, discover what they have on that current production app. So find the current state. And the current state isn't based on the initial install scripts. As everyone knows, applications that are 5 to 15 years old have had many upgrades occur over a course of time. Those patches or upgrades typically aren't all tracked inside of an IT environment, so the runbooks aren't fully up to date, the install scripts aren't available, source code may not even be available, and the original developers, in most cases, have left the organization some time ago. The app owner may be a new app owner who inherited the application, so they have some knowledge, but not complete knowledge of the system. So our customers need help. They need a way to discover that state dynamically, and that's what our intelligence product does. It goes in and actually discovers the current state of the application that exists on your production server environment, and it copies that out dynamically into a container on your destination server or your target server. Most customers are moving to Windows Server 2012, 2016, and certainly we support 2019 as well. So we copy out the app and all of the data or state components, the dependencies of that application, into the container environment. If there's OS configuration issues, IP address, server names, things like that, they all come across dynamically into this container on the destination. And that's the second stage, a non-volatile copy out process. It doesn't affect your current production environment. It can be done while you're running the application. The copy out process can run in parallel with use of the application in the production environment. Obviously, when you get to the cutover stage, you do need a quiescence point to make sure that everything is in sync. And once you've verified the app is running the same way as you would expect inside of the container, and you want to cut over into stage 3, where you dissolve the container, you verified that the app works the same way, that's where you need to ensure that there is a cutover time and a sync point between production and the new version that's installed in stage 3. In stage 3, the container on the target is dissolved, the old app is reinstalled into the area it should be on the target OS environment. The state data is put where it should be, and the configuration data shows up in the right spot in the modern OS. Once you've done that, you've effectively moved the production app that was running on old servers to a new server environment. We think that's the best first move to get you to a better place that's secure, running on faster servers, more secure OS environment. It solves many of the malware exposures that exist on legacy Windows Server 2003 or other environments like that. The next two stages are optional, but we certainly see customers doing them. The first is to remediate the app in some way, perhaps to upgrade it. So, for example, if the application was dependent on an old version of SQL Server, we can then do an in-place upgrade in compatibility mode that would upgrade the SQL version to a newer supported version on that operating system. So that's true for SQL, but it's true for many apps. You can then upgrade in place that application. If you have source code, you can go in and make code changes. So customers may do things like fix cross-site scripting issues that were legacy issues associated with the old production app, if it was a web-based service, and they want to fix those security issues or a variety of other enhancements to the product. Once that's the case, once it's on the new server, you have source code, you can go through standard change management processes. There's nothing different. There's no dependency on our container. You can continue to evolve, improve, recode that application as you normally would. The fifth stage, which we're going to demo today as well, is the ability to take it and install that application into a Windows Docker container. A Windows Docker environment, obviously there's a host OS or hypervisor outside of the Windows Docker container. You can take the upgraded app and install it into that container, and a Windows Docker container includes core OS components that will be inside the container as well. Clearly, there's version issues. It depends on whether you're on Windows Server 2016 or 2019 as to which version of the Docker container you're going to support. There can be performance and security issues, monitoring that you may want to do in that environment. It doesn't mean that the application is fully remediated to the point where you would have microservice architecture or other things, Kubernetes support. You would need to code that in as part of a future enhancement of the product over time. But at least you're on a modern platform where you can make those changes over time and you can support that architecture because those containers run on the modern OSs. From our perspective, 2016 was more of an experimental platform for Windows Docker containers. 2019 is the first version where we're going to see some production rollout, probably in the next 18 months to 2 years, with customers doing redevelopment around microservice architectures and Docker containers on Windows Server 2019. So that's the 5 stages of the migration journey that we see. And the next slide basically outlines what I've discussed, each step. And the slides are available and will be distributed afterwards to attendees. But it explains each of those 5 steps and stages. So what we'd like to do now is Scott's going to provide a simple demo of a web-based application that goes through this 5-stage journey. We're not enhancing it in the optional stage 4, but we will ultimately end up in a Windows Docker container. So you'll see a demo that demonstrates that. It's not the most sophisticated application, but it is good for example purposes. So over to you, Scott.
Thank you, Nigel. So I'll just get going on the video here, and it'll demonstrate what we've been talking about. And as Nigel said, this is pretty straightforward. What we're showing initially here is the source machine and the web page that we're talking about, the WordPress page that's on here. Again, just a couple of entries. It is a 2003 machine, I think it was. And then we're doing all of the work on the destination server. And in this case here, it is a 2016 server, right? So we can go all the way up to 2019 if required. 2012 R2 if somebody's gold image in their environment is less than. And the only components we need to have installed is the VirtaMove software. That's where all the action takes place, and that's how we control the migrations through our software. So we'll go through some of the simple, straightforward steps that we perform during the course of our migrations, and these are covered in some of the materials that Nigel was talking about in our documentation, of course. The first thing we need to do is create a landing location for the items coming from that source machine. We'll call that a container. We've just named it WordPress. We need to identify the source machine itself. We're doing that with the IP address, but you can use the host name, the fully qualified, and we'll test and make sure that that connection is correct and good. We're using our source agent tool, which has many advantages. Few of them to start off with really are security based, right? So we use an encryption key that's created during the installation of our software. So it's a unique key, and that encryption key is used as the pairing key between the two servers. Not only that, any of the data that's transferred between the source and destination, not only is it encrypted, but we also compress that information as well to try and overcome some latency concerns that may exist in environments and help overcome those things. Once that's all connected, we need to find which applications are on there. We've done that. We're going to select just the component that we want to bring across. So we're a little bit different than other migration utilities, which take all of the applications, all of the OS components, etc. We're only bringing over just the ones that are identified and important for the business unit itself. Once that's been identified, we'll begin the copy process. So the initial part of that is what we call the pre-population side of things, and it's bringing over all of the folder structure, the files, the registry information, services, etc., and bringing them into our holding location, our VirtaMove container. Once that happens, we can really enter to what we call the exercise phase, but it is really like a user acceptance testing. So we'll stand up that application. We go through a process that we refer to as doc, VirtaMove process called doc, and that's enabling the underlying OS to see and use and interact with the application that we're attempting to migrate over from that source machine. So in this case, we can actually start those services that are associated with the WordPress page, bring them to life. The act of starting those services is also allowing the OS to interact with them, but it's also verifying the files in that container that have been brought over. So every time a file is called and used by the application, we'll actually serve that up from within the context of our container. If we don't have it, we'll go back across that connected link, that secure link, and bring that component across. So testing out the web page, we're just going to the local host here. You can see that we have all of the application components brought over. That page is displaying correctly. It's being brought across. And so we're successful at that point. So here's where we have that fork in the road that we talked about, or Nigel talked about, and we can make a decision to go through the dissolve process and push those components directly to the underlying OS here. But in this case, what we want to do is move this to a different server altogether, showcasing our compress and move technology that we have. And so we're just going through the compress function here now, and it's taking all of those individual files and creating a single file that's much easier to handle and use and actually copy between locations. And the copy is a very standard copy process, and we've actually gone through that and moved it to what we're going to create and use as our additional location, right? And in this case, it is the same 2016 server, not the same, but an additional 2016 server. But this guy actually has the Docker for Windows components installed on it here. And so we're going to utilize the Docker side of things to perform the actions that we need. So we're actually going to go through, we've scripted it, and this is kind of highlighting that our software is very compatible with scripting on that side of things, right? So all of our commands and switches and everything else are readily available to be used by folks that want to do it and stay out of the GUI interface if that's their preference. We can lean on that. And in this case, we are doing that to work with Docker, which does not have much in the way of a GUI interface at all. So we have to shoehorn our technology in there, but it is compatible. And so we've done all of that, again, scripting it from the command line here. And there are components, we'll drop down in a second and see how that works. And so you can see the dissolve was successful. We've pushed that into the Docker side of things. It's just a matter of starting those requisite services associated with the WordPress application itself. Once that's completed, we should be able to view and see the application itself running here in just a quick moment. We'll give that a second to catch up here. There we go. So we should be able to see the web page here now, locally hosted on this third server now, our second destination server, and we can see the pages here. Everything seems to be working all right, and we should be able to view the contents of that page as soon as the refresh happens. And it's exact same image or images and context and content, etc., that we had on that first server, that first source machine that was running a much older OS. And now we're actually running this guy within the context of Docker. We could drop down into a PowerShell as well, and we could interact and see that we have this component running inside of the Docker using a Docker container, using that ls command, the list command, to show that we do have that WordPress VirtaMove demo container running in here, and everything is working as we expect it to. Again, I think, not sure exactly what we're showing here. It takes just a second. We're just showing the services here. I think it was what we're after at this point in time, to show that those components are listed inside of the services on the Docker side of things. So if we look through here, we won't see any of those services associated with the WordPress page, right? Because it is self-contained within the Docker side of things. So none of those items will be present inside of here. None of the WordPress stuff is listed at this point in time, right? So showing exactly what we tried to demo to you today is that move to destination server where we could have stayed, but then taking all of that information and then moving it into the Docker container itself.
Great. Thanks, Scott. So at this point, we're open to some question and answers. So, Candace, do we have any questions that we'd like to address today?
We have two. First one, do you recommend going to Windows Docker containers on a 2016?
Well, that's a really good question, Candace. And I guess what we would say is Windows Docker containers on 2016 were kind of the early first stage version, and we certainly showed support for that environment today. But we don't believe that that's going to be the platform where most of the work is going to be done on with Windows Docker containers and microservices architectures. We think that it's going to be on Windows Server 2019 and on new versions going forward. So generally, we wouldn't recommend it to put production workload on Windows Server 2016 on inside of a Docker container. Those were more experimental platforms. And we think that all of the major enhancement work and focus will be on the 2019 version and going forward. So that's the answer there.
Okay, and the last one we have, why does state matter if you're trying to put apps into a Docker container?
Well, that's really a good question as well, Candace, because if you think about it, we know that you can use install scripts to install into a Docker container. The issue that really comes up is if you do even have the install scripts, you're talking about the initial version of a production application. Most of these applications we're talking about have been around for between 5 and 15 years. Companies are running, and depending on those applications, they've been modified and patched many times. You really don't want to roll back to the initial install scripts. That's not the current state of the application. The current state of the application is the initial install script and probably 5 to 20 patches that have been made over a course of time, plus all the reconfiguration. And the current state needs to be discovered. You can't really use simple install script process to install into a Docker container because many or most of our customers that don't have them, and it isn't the current state of their production environment. And that's why state matters. You need to be able to discover that dynamically based on what's running in your current environment. And that's what our software does. It has all that intelligence to bring that state across and then to use it however you'd like to enhance your products and your applications on new servers. It's why it's the best first move to get you to a better place on more secure servers, on faster running servers. And you can then remediate and change the application from there going forward. So that's the answer to that question. But if that's all we have, are those all the questions?
One other question, Nigel, was just related to how we address applications where the app and the DB reside on different servers.
Oh, that's a really good question. Most of the major production applications we work on are what we would call multi-tiered. So there are database servers and front-end servers, and we do have a very complete and thorough methodology about how you bring those multi-tiered applications across and test them properly and the dependencies they have. One of the major advantages of our monitoring product is that we will automatically detect those external server dependencies and show, there may well be a database that has to be brought across along with your current production environment. So that is very much part of the process. It isn't just a one server, single tier move. We deal with multi-tier all the time. Do you have any other comment about that, Scott?
No, I think you pretty much nailed it there, Nigel.
So that's great. Any other questions?
Oh, I think we're at the end of the good questions, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And if you'd like to learn more, we'd love to have individual session, talk about the sorts of problems or issues that you have or challenges, and share what we know. Thanks a lot.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.